need to know this. Reports from senior officials within the Egyptian government this afternoon indicated that President Hosni Mubarak would finally give in to the demands of anti-government protesters and step down as leader of that nation tonight. These reports were greeted with jubilation in Tahrir Square, where tens of thousands of demonstrators gathered for the 17th day in a row to demand democracy. But then a few hours ago, Mubarak addressed the Egyptian people and proved those reports wrong. He says he's not going anywhere. He did transfer some authority to his vice president, Omar Suleiman, who then addressed the nation and told the crowds in the streets to go home. But the protesters aren't listening, and now they feel betrayed. And reports suggest they plan to march to the presidential palace, meaning it may just be a matter of time before their peaceful demonstrations are confronted by violence and become violent. And thus concludes a day in Egypt that began with massive labor protests around the country aimed at the petroleum, railway, telecommunications, and steel sectors, and ends with the masses furious that their efforts have once again been ignored by their government. A long night may be ahead for Egypt. So what happens? With Mubarak not stepping aside, are dark days ahead for this democracy movement in that country? Here to offer some more analysis on what's going on in the near the Nile is T.J. Walker, commentator with Reuters and columnist for Forbes, and Dr. Richard Weitz, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Policy and Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate it very much. Richard Weitz, what happened today?
Well, it was interesting because we were getting different signals, but at one point it looked like President Mubarak was going to resign. And then there was a question of what would happen next. Would he transfer all power to his vice president? If not, then who? Maybe a unity government. It wasn't really clear what was going to happen. And then he made his speech, and I watched it live, and then he didn't resign. He just said, "No, I'm going to stick around. I'll leave in September when my constitutional term ends. You know, I'm a war hero, so I'm going to put Egypt's interests first," and so on. And then the protesters look very dispirited, and now they're trying to look angry. So tomorrow it's going to be a very unpleasant day in Egypt, I think.
TJ, the initial leak that Mubarak was going to step down, was this something from the opposition made to look like it was coming from the government in order to put them in a bind, or do you think that the government, that someone in the government, perhaps even in the military, was actually trying to push Mubarak in this direction, or was it just some wild rumor that went out?
Well, whoever did it, they definitely helped make Mubarak look worse than ever. I mean, he really failed to meet expectations with this speech. Expectations were so high, and he got up there and said, basically, "I'm not ever leaving." So he completely squashed people's hopes. And it was a very, very poor speech. He kept on referring to the people of his country as children. It was so condescending. It was almost the caricature of what people think of as the dictator looking at the people as just my children. And then he talked about, I was this, I was a fighter, I sacrificed. I mean, come on, you've been living in luxury for 30 years. Don't talk about all the sacrifices. So all in all he did was totally inflame passions in that square. As he was speaking, you heard louder and louder chants for him to leave.
Right. Richard, is the Vice President Suleiman now basically in charge? I mean, was there a transfer of power? He talked about a partial transfer of responsibilities.
Well, we don't know. It's unclear because clearly since he's still in office, he has some authority. Vice President Suleiman has some authority, but the military itself has also said it has taken authority and starting issuing orders. So the power center is unclear. It's still the old regime.
Sure. But Suleiman came out and said, everybody go home now. Nobody went home.
Right.
I mean, so...
Right. We have to be, of course, a little cautious that what we're seeing is a very strong, 1 million people protest movement in Cairo. Yeah. But there are a lot, millions of more other Egyptians, and they have diverse opinions. And we don't really know, because there hasn't been a free election, what is the exact popularity. He has some popularity, and the protesters have some, but until we have a free election, we won't really know where it is.
TJ, could Mubarak have pulled off his non-departure today without the support of the military? And to what extent might the Saudis, having come out and said, if the Americans cut you off, we'll give you some bucks, don't worry. It's kind of like the dictators in the region are circling the wagons. To what extent might that have factored into it?
Well, there are a lot of people scared there, and we don't really know when he shot this speech. I mean, it appeared to be a video, and is that because he's afraid of being in a building where people could come after him? Yeah, his relationship with the military right now, is unclear at this point.
You think it's possible he shot the
like
speech this morning or last night, you mean?
Well, no, I'm not saying it was that long ago, but it did not appear to be live. Interesting speech tidbit, though, for your viewers. He had teleprompters. He started off with them, and it's almost like his teleprompter operator got scared and ran away, because for 2/3 of his speech, he was sitting there reading, and I just thought that was bizarre. But overall, his tone was just so self-indulgent. He said, "This is not about me," when clearly it is about him. It was a completely tone-deaf speech, and it is, I think, something you would associate with somebody who's been isolated and entrenched in power for so long that he just doesn't have any touch with what people are thinking.
Richard, do you think this guy's delusional? I mean, he's sitting on $70 billion. That does something to people's heads. He's had literally absolute power for 30 years, the power to simply say, you're dead, and people get dead. I mean, that's got to change somebody's humanity.
I don't know if delusional is the right word. He certainly has a perception of his position in Egypt, what his role should be, and how constitutional authority should be exercised. We just don't know. He has, as I said, he does have some popularity, but to what extent, it's unclear. In fact, he's not going to run. He's made that clear. His son is not going to run. So it's now the question.
That's still 7 months down the road.
Right. I mean, you can make the arguments either way. If you have a snap election, then all those people in the square haven't had time to organize, form a political party.
Sure.
Usually, in these kind of transitions, you usually do have some authority and some international participation supervise it and have a process of democratic elections. Now, it shouldn't just be the old regime. There should be some members of the protest group, some members of civil society, others brought together in some kind of consensus arrangement in which they'll proceed to new elections. But this member date doesn't bother me. I'm just worried that they might not be free and fair.
If he flees the country or does step down, is Suleiman going to be in the same position? Is he going to be stuck? I mean, is he going to have to run? Or do you think it's not going to get to that? And I want to throw the same question to TJ, and we just have a minute and a half left. For both
I don't think Suleiman has much popularity or authority independent of Mubarak. So if Mubarak's regime falls, it's hard to me to see that he would stay on. Yeah. But then I don't know who, because it's not clear to me who would legitimately be the proper authority to supervise. I guess you would have to have some kind of unity government.
TJ, is al-Baradei a viable alternative?
Al-Baradei is in many ways the exact opposite of Mubarak. Mubarak today was I this, I that, I this. Mubarak is, and I know from personal experience, I have been his presentation coach and media coach when he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He is a very humble man. He's not in this for the power. He doesn't like to talk about himself. And at this point, that could be the perfect antidote to what people have been suffering under Mubarak for all this time.
So you think he could run a short-term caretaker government?
His stock is rising. He is exactly the opposite of what they've had, and that's what they want. I think if Mubarak flees the country, that would release tremendous pressure. And that's the real problem with him saying he's turning over power to anyone else. No one really believes it. He's had absolute power for 30 years. As long as he's in that country, he will be perceived as having absolute power.
Amazing. TJ, Richard, thank you both, gentlemen, for both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps